oh, great, we're going to have to be doing a lot of back and forth knitting. And I had to rip out 2 full balls of knitting. It's already texture. It's already moving parts. It's already knitting and purling with cables. So who the heck cares? I could have put this aside and never thought about it again. Yay!
I'm Nora, and this is also known as Nora.
Hello there, I'm Nora, and you're watching, also known as Nora Knits. Thank you so much for joining me for another podcast episode today. I am going to be talking about a recently finished object, a project that I sort of overhauled over the past week. I have 2 new cast-ons, one that is going to be completely new to the channel, and the other you would have seen the swatch for last week. So I'm really excited to chat about everything that I have going on knitting wise this week. However, before I get started, I have 2 winners to announce today for the holiday give a yay. One is from last week's podcast and one is from the winter knitting plans video. So if you see your name on the screen here, please make sure to email me at aka_NoraKnits with your Ravelry username so that I can get those patterns into your hands ASAP, and definitely keep your ears up for what all we have going on today. Anyway, I think that without further ado, we should go ahead and dive on in. Now, I will just briefly start with what I'm wearing because I dug out a little bit of a relic today. I mean, that's a little dramatic, but this is a sweater that I had knit last year. It was actually a test knit for Sorry Nordland. This is called the Lykke Pullover, if I'm not mistaken. I had knit mine out of webs, so it was the, every time. It's their alpaca silk yarn that I held double with the, I think it was the Valley Yarns 100% wool. Then I'll make sure that it's on the screen. Something was Jaeger spun, heather, something like that. So it was 100% wool held with a strand of lace weight alpaca silk for the majority of what you see. And then I have these little, it's a chevron striped kind of lacy textured sweater. And I had done my stripes with a thrifted kind of mohair boucle that I had in stash, held actually with another boucle yarn that I had in stash. I'm assuming that one's probably more like an alpaca. I don't know which either is exactly because they were both thrifted without labels on them. This sweater has been sitting at the bottom of my sweater pile, and I don't even know why, because obviously it's a really nice basic white sweater that I should get a lot more wear out of, and it is a DK weight, so it's a little bit more on the thinner side, a little more lightweight, which I really love. And I got a ton of wear out of it last year. I don't know why I haven't really dug it out yet this season, so I thought that was really fun to pair with my favorite little Christmassy blazer for today. And I'll definitely make sure to link the Ravelry page down below, because I do believe this is one that I would have gone in and added some notes since it was a test knit. But with that out of the way, I would love to talk about my finished object today, and that is what I've been calling the Jose, My Jose hood by Norgard Knitters. It occurred to me this week when watching another podcast, and I cannot even remember which one it was, but they called it something like My Josie hood. And then I realized that, you know, it's very possible this is not being pronounced as My Jose, but I like the alliteration of the sound. So I'll continue to call it My Jose hood, even though that's probably definitely not what it's actually called. Anyway, it is a garter stitch scarf hood thing, and I knit mine out of Cake Wool Company, their milk and cream. That's their single ply fingering weight yarn, along with their silk mohair, both in the colorway Waking Dream. And I finished mine in exactly 14 days, so exactly 2 weeks this took. Here is the project just kind of folded in half so that you could get a better sense of what's going on. So in my hand over here, this is actually the part of the hood that goes across the forehead, and then down here are the ends of the tie scarves. I will put this on for you in a second, but you could see here that it is a rather substantial sized accessory. Now, I also knit mine in a finer yarn than what is called for in the pattern. I believe that she calls for an Aran weight yarn, and mine is that fingering plus mohair, which I think is about a DK weight. I did knit mine on 4mm needles versus the 5mm needles that are suggested in the pattern. And the only thing that I did to compensate for that difference, because I never did a gauge swatch. It's such a, well, I thought it was going to be a small knit, but it really did wind up being quite a bit more substantial is the word than I was thinking about. So the only way that I compensated for the gauge difference is that in the first little square here, which is how you cast on, again, this is the part that's actually sits at the front of the forehead. So that's where you cast on, you work back, and there's some short rows in there, but that square, I added just a couple of arbitrary number stitches to the width of it, as well as did a few more rows than what she stated to do in the pattern. After that, though, I did just follow what the rest of the pattern says. So once you do complete that little square, you wind up picking up stitches alongside of it, and then you're working with increases all the way down. Now I'm holding it so that it's facing you like this, and you're working those increases all the way down, which is creating these increases, decreases, increases, increases. So you're working those increases all the way down, which is how you wind up with these long kind of pendants. And then at the very end, you wind up adding an I-cord edge to everything. So you start with actually the bottom edge, adding an I-cord edge there, and then also adding these ties, and then the I-cord edge that runs along the front. Now, the second thing that I did to just kind of compensate for the gauge difference in mine versus the original pattern is that I wound up making my ties, I think about before blocking, it was about 3 inches longer than what she says to in the pattern. And that was just to make sure that if the scarf did not wrap around all the way, I'd still be able to tie it in the front. But also I would never mind my bows being a little bit bigger than planned. So that was what all I did. Now, I really should have taken some before and after blocking. At least photos would have been helpful to see. But this did wind up growing quite a bit in blocking. And part of that is due to the way that I did stretch it. And I'm not happy with the way that I did that. I don't know if there's a way now to, if I reblock it, will this snap back? But basically what I noticed is that I'm sure that my row gauge is vastly different from what is stated in the pattern. And so the way that the increase rate kind of works out, I was finding that the height of the hood should have been a little bit taller. So when I blocked it, I was kind of trying to stretch out the I-cord. And what it wound up doing was also stretching out along the top of the front, which I really didn't need to do. And so I'm getting this wavily wobbliness that's happening, and I'm not crazy about the way that that's looking, but again, maybe I could just reblock it and fix it. Honestly, this is the first time I blocked something, and it was literally washed, block, dry all in the same day, and that was really fun. I just laid actually the whole thing out completely flat, which I also think is what wound up overstretching the I-cord that's in the front. It's not the end of the world. It'll be okay, but just thought that was worth mentioning. Let me pop it on so that you could see what it looks like on. So again, just for reference, we have this is what it is, kind of the silhouette of it. This is the front of the hood, the base of the hood, and then the increases go all the way out. So the way that this works is that it goes on like so. And you have these really long scarfy bits that wrap around the neck. And now this is where you could see that my rate of increases, I just think I should have done more to keep this length a little bit longer, because when I wrap it, I feel like I should have a little bit more distance before it's kind of like cutting into my chin, if that makes any sense. But it's not the end of the world. And I think that if you were on gauge, that's something that she did already compensate for in the pattern. So once it's on, the long scarfy bit goes back and around. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Very much like this. And then at this point, you can kind of control how loose or tight. You're actually doing everything. And I'm trying to do this while looking into the world's tiniest screen across the room from me. So bear that in mind too. And then, yeah, you just kind of tie off the front. And like I said, my ties are a bit longer than what she has in the pattern, but I think it's really cute. I don't mind it at all. And then, yeah, you could see here, these are the seams of where the stitches were picked up after the first little square that was knit. And then the kind of tips of the pendant shaped scarf point, those are what are touching in the front, and then the I-cord ties are tied there. So I just was feeling like mine could have done with a little bit more length so that it wasn't cutting off too soon. I think that you could see that it does kind of come straight down and then it starts cutting off just a little bit higher than it should, but it's really not bad at all. And then from here you can kind of fuss and adjust just how much coverage you want this to have. Now, I wore this actually out just for a little bit while taking Osi out today to see how warm it was. And I think that, again, I over blacked mine. This is entirely my fault. And also just the gauge difference and everything. The garter stitch is definitely allowing a lot of air to come through. And if I didn't want that to be the case, I'm sure I could have just knit this at a more dense gauge. So I should have even maybe dropped my needle size down a little bit further. But it's fine. This I'm planning to pair mostly with my wool pea coat style coat that doesn't have a hood already, so that I can have this as an option when it does just get a little bit chillier out. But I also think that I just really like how loose it is, so that if I've done my hair already for the day, I don't have to worry about hat hair as much. That's the theory. I haven't tested that out yet, but I just think it's so cute. I think that this would look really fun, you know, in lieu of like a hoodie or something with a leather jacket. I just think it would soften that up a little bit, especially if I were to knit this again in a more neutral color. I just think it's a really sweet little accessory. And the only thing is that obviously all of that warmth is directed right at the neck and at the throat. So it's really nice for the back of the neck as well as the front, but you're not getting any chest coverage that you would typically with a proper scarf. So just keep that in mind if that was something that you were looking for in your winter accessory. I would plan to maybe knit a set of this with the Midland neck by Laura Penrose. That's a garter stitched dickie. And so I think then the garter stitch would be continuous and that would look really, really cute. And you'd get the neck coverage as well as the scarf coverage. Or if you wanted to play around with it a little bit more, I think that you could, in lieu of I-cords, I think that you can maybe play around with not decreasing all of the way to the points at the end and just leaving kind of long, wider spans of stockinette. That way you actually have like a proper additional scarf hanging off and tying it. So you could tie that in a bow and then also use that to kind of tuck inside of a wool coat, and it would just give a little bit more coverage. But I'm really happy with this. Now you can see here, this is what I'm talking about when I said I overblocked it, and this is my error in just the I-cord. I kind of overstretched it. So it's not wanting to sit super flat. It's kind of doing this like rippling and bunching thing, which again, isn't the end of the world, but that was my fault. Definitely don't overblock your I-cord. But the really fun thing here is that you could just tug then the hood down and have more of just a scarf, and you don't need to wear the hood up. So I think it's a really fun accessory. It's very warm. I will say that the mohair on the neck is just a littlest bit itchy, and I'm glad that I did that in this project and not a dickie, because I was actually thinking about putting some mohair in a dickie. And I think that that would just kind of wind up getting a little too fussy, especially with makeup and like around your mouth and stuff. I would wind up with mohair in your lip gloss all day. So I definitely am going to avoid that for the dickie that I wind up knitting. But overall, I'm very satisfied with this. I did wind up knitting those I-cords a little bit long. So if I hadn't, I think that you could also wear this just open, almost a little bit more like a shawl, and it would be a little bit more dual purpose that way. Obviously, you still get the hood kind of look on the back, so that's something just to be mindful of. But because my I-cords are so long, they actually travel nearly all the way down my legs. So I think that would just look a little bit too silly for my liking. But otherwise, I think this is a great project. Now, it did take me a full 2 weeks to knit this, and that wasn't just like casual knitting. There were a few days that were pretty dedicated to knitting on this. So just keep it in mind too that even though it is an accessory, I mean, it was a lot of knitting. I could This is equivalent, honestly, to probably a sleeve on a sweater on like that just amount of knitting, even more than that. This could probably cover my body if I needed it to. So it is a good bit of knitting for an accessory, but at that, you're getting a sort of scarf and hat in one. So that's really nice. Now, I am going to weigh this really quick because I'm curious to know exactly how much yarn I used up. All right, so this guy's weighing in around 206 grams. I'll be sure to put on the screen here the remnants that I have from the last two skeins that I tapped into, so you get a better idea of just how much yarn it used if you wanted to try to get this one out of stash. And with that, I think that we should dive into the finished object stats for this project. All right, so this was, as I said, the My Jose hood by Nora Knitters. The pattern price is $8.81. Now, this pattern was very generously gifted to me by a viewer of the channel, so thank you so much for supporting the channel in that way. The yarn that I used, like I said, was Cake Wool Company, and that's their Milk and Cream, both in the colorway Waking Dream. These are both yarns that I had in my stash, and they had been gifted by my friend Shayla, so I was really happy to finally use them in a project. Looking online, if you were to purchase these yarns at full price, it looks like for the fingering weight yarn, that's about $28 for one skein. And then the silk mohair, that's about $30 for one skein. And obviously, as they were gifted from a friend, I did not pay for either yarn. Now, I will say that I did wind up having to tap into 2 skeins of each of the yarns. So this was not a single skein of fingering, single skein of mohair type project. I did wind up having to open up all 4 skeins of the yarn, which means that if I was going out to purchase this yarn to make this project again, I would wind up having to purchase 2 of each, the fingering and silk mohair. And therefore, if I was buying them at full price, I would pay around $116 total on the yarn for this project. And of course, the savings look good here because it was gifted, so I did not pay. Being that there were no additional expenses or anything like that, the full price project total, so had I purchased the pattern and the yarn, would come in at $124.81, but I'm a lucky girl, and the yarn and the pattern were both gifted, so I did not pay anything for this one. And that was, again, a project that was on the needles for 14 days. Now, I obviously feel so lucky to be able to make a over $100 hood for zero cost out of my own pocket. But I also think it's worth mentioning that this is just the difference between in my normal projects. I'm not typically gravitated towards hand-dyed yarn. I will say if I am, it is typically a tonal. So this just spoke to me in many, many ways. And it was fun to play with color, to play with hand-dyed yarn. It was interesting to see all the variations. Would I typically purchase these supplies for this project, for any project? Honestly, no. But that's just my style, and I do feel really lucky to have been able to play with it and experience it. And I do have a good bit left over, so I think that there is a world where I'm using the rest of this to make some sort of set. I think little fingerless mittens or something like that would be really fun here. So if you have a skein and a half each of a fingering weight and a mohair yarn that you're looking to get out of stash, I definitely recommend using it for this project because it does eat up that good bit of yarn. I just feel like for me, this isn't one that I would go out of my way to buy the fancy yarn for. I think it would be a great stash buster instead. So anyway, that is My Jose hood by Nora Knitters, and let us move on to the first whip. If you saw last week's podcast episode, then you know that this was one that was giving me a little bit of anxiety. It is my Grayling Sweater by Magdalena Parker. This is an all-over cable knit sweater, drop shoulder, that I am knitting into a maxi dress. I'm using Knit Picks Wonder Fluff in the colorway Espresso Heather, and I had been knitting mine in the size 4. However, when I tried it on after mid-project block, I was finding that it was a little bit bigger than I was hoping for. Now, I have a reference dress that is a maxi length sweater dress that I'm kind of trying to replicate the fit of. So that's really helpful in this situation that I know the goal dimensions that I'm going for, especially in a flat lay. I have that there to sort of just reference. And I think that the number one question I was getting after disclosing all of the numbers and fit issues last week was just to take into account body shaping for bust, waist, hips. All of those measurements are obviously different. And I did choose a size based off of my hip measurement. However, even still with it looking too big around the bust, it was still bigger than the hip measurement that I was going for. Now, I'm not planning to do any shaping in this. I am looking for a sort of potato sacky type dress. So by no means do I expect this to be a figure flattering type garment. I just wanted to make sure that I'm getting enough positive ease in all areas of the body without it being so big that it looks a little silly. And then also considering the fact that with wear, it will stretch out probably even a little bit more. So if things are looking too big right now, then already I know we're off to a bad start. So let me pop what I have going on up onto Helena the Hanger so we can take a closer look. Here we have it. Now, if things are looking familiar, that's because just today I was actually able to re-knit back to the same spot we left off last week. Now, after last week's video, I read the comments, I assessed the situation, I went and I looked at my reference dress again, I looked at the numbers in the pattern again, I remeasured, and I decided that I wanted to rip back to the underarm and utilize less stitches in the body. So I was knitting this in the size 4. The differences between the sizes 3 and 4 have everything to do with the cables under the arms. So I could have ripped back to the underarm and then just started with the instructions for the size 3 instead. But based on the measurements that I was getting after blocking this, I felt like if I had just gone down to the size 3, I would wind up with a sweater that was 2 inches less in circumference than what I was looking for. And while I do anticipate this stretching out a little bit and blocking, or having the opportunity even to not in blocking and wearing, or having the opportunity to stretch it out more in blocking if need be, I also was looking at my reference dress and decided that if it was an inch bigger in the body, I think I'd be even more happy with the fit. So what I didn't want to do was go down 2 inches in the circumference and then feel like it was just too small. So instead of dropping down to the size 3, which meant just no cable under the arms of this sweater, I actually made up some numbers, and this is what I had done earlier in the year when I knit my Feel Good cable sweater. To knit something in between sizes in a cable sweater, I am going to have basically a pinstripe of just stockinette running down the sides. And the number of stitches that I chose, which was here, it's 3 stitches wide. And then we continue the purl stitches in between the cables, in between the pinstripe, the same it is everywhere else. The number that I chose here, those 3 stitches, that was based off of my blocked gauge measurements, all of that stuff. So right now, as I'm knitting this, the goal is to have a circumference of about 49 inches, which is the exact measurement of the circumference on my reference dress. And there I'm leaving in that wiggle room for stretching it out a little bit, and I'd be happy with it to be a little bit wider in the circumference than the reference dress is. So This is what I had done on my Feel Good cable sweater earlier in the year when I was trying to knit between sizes. I just have this little stockinette pinstripe going down the sides of that sweater, and it really doesn't bother me at all. I had some suggestions to do a smaller cable, so less stitches in a cable, I guess kind of the equivalent of what I did, but still cabling it. And I decided that for me, having different sized cables would be just a little bit more busy than a single stockinette stripe. I also thought about maybe just doing purl stitches completely across that panel, but then I thought that in the end it would probably look a little bit cheaper because it would almost look like I've printed a pattern on the front and back of a garment and just left out the sides. So having seen it now after 2 more cable repeats, so again, we're actually back exactly where we were last week with just fewer stitches on this garment. I'm really happy with the choice that I made. I think it looks really smart and a little sporty, and I'm completely fine with that. Now, this was really interesting to rip out. The Wonder Fluff yarn is a blown yarn. It's a nylon tube, if I'm not mistaken, with baby alpaca blown in there. And I had blocked the sweater already, so the yarn was kind of happy where it was. And I had to rip out 2 full balls of knitting, which also means that the size I was knitting before was taking, I think it was a little bit less than a full ball of yarn per cable repeat. So I could probably math this now and make sure I have enough yarn to keep going at the length I'm planning to, but I had to rip all of that out. And I've never ripped out mohair before, but I've heard stories, the horrors of it. I imagine that this was similar. What was happening was that basically every few stitches that I ripped out, the yarn was just really sticking to each other and it did not want to budge. So every few stitches, I had to kind of individually go in and disconnect a single stitch of knitting just to rip it out. And the yarn that I did rip out it looks rough. It looks like it's been through something. So for the time being, I've put that yarn aside, and my ideal is that I'll get through the whole project without having to use it. But worst case, I do want to just at least save it until the hem of the dress, something that people aren't going to have their nose up in. Not that anyone's having their nose up here, but you know what I mean. I don't want it to be at eye level. So I did break into some new yarn to reknit what I did, but it literally took hours to rip out what I had. I took a photo I had posted on Instagram. To be honest, after that, I was feeling a little bit defeated. It felt like if I hadn't just gone ahead and started knitting again in that moment, I could have put this aside and never thought about it again because it was a little bit of a party pooper type situation. But my goal for this week was to then get it back to the state that we were at, so it doesn't really feel like I lost too much progress on it. That being said, though, the ideal goal was to have this done for Christmas, and I can say now that I am certain it's not going to be done for Christmas, but my family does a couple other kind of like Christmas celebration things after actual Christmas, so it's possible I could wear it to one of those, and worst case, I will find an occasion to wear it. Now I'm just feeling determined to have this done. So I thought that today I could pop in a progress keeper because the last time I did this, I literally just took it out so that I could block it right away. So we'll throw this in here now. And I was hoping to get this guy on some try it on tubing because I have yet to try it on since I made the adjustments that I did. And just to double check that we're on the right track, I think that'd be a good idea. So I have my try it on tubing. Let us go ahead and start some try it on tubing and chat. I saw a comment. That's what it was. I had posted on Instagram, there was one of those templates going around on the stories where people were asking, just, as a content creator, if there was anything that you wanted to see more or less of on the channel, basically. And someone said, I want to see more try it on tubing and chat. It's my favorite part. I was like, that's really cool. So definitely I will keep that in mind. So I guess similarly, if you have anything that you have been enjoying over the year, or if there are any aspects of the channel that you want to see more of, more different videos, anything like that, I'd love to know what you're thinking, as I have it on my mind while we're going into 2025, which I cannot believe. If you don't know, I do like to use this time to get a little more chatty. Sometimes I'll answer some questions. Sometimes I'll give you some silly little anecdotes about what I've got on the needles. And sometimes it's just a little lifey. So with the end of the year coming, I'm feeling rather lifey today. And I'm looking at 2025 and just considering all of the ideas and things that I have. I don't necessarily set a New Year's resolution or anything like that, but certainly over the past few years, I've wound up either intentionally or unintentionally having like a different theme to every year. So it's typically maybe something that I'm learning that year. I've always wound up having a hobby be the theme. Just a couple years ago, last year, the theme was knitting. That was 2023's intention and theme was learning how to knit, and obviously that went very well. So then this year was a little bit more of just kind of honing in the channel. In years prior, it would have been woodworking, or it was very sewing heavy, or it was very music heavy. So there's always been just inevitably I get kind of stuck on one thing. And so yes, I'm looking into 2025, and I was wondering if there was any sort of new craft or a hobby that I could take up, but I feel like the knitting is just still very exciting for me. I was trying to figure out why this was, chatting with a knitting friend over the week, and I was trying to figure out why is it that knitting has stuck when so many of my other hobbies, while I still love them and am happy to dig them out once in a while, they're just not something that has really stuck the way that knitting has. And I think for me, what's really fascinating is that within the hobby, there's so much new and so many things to learn that it still has not burnt out my excitement yet. I don't feel, not that I feel like in any of my other hobbies I've reached some sort of mastery level, but there's just something about the learning something new. That's the part that I really enjoy and why I have picked up so many hobbies. So when it comes to knitting, I mean, even just coming up with my winter knitting plans, I'm realizing I really haven't done a lot of color work, and I really haven't knit brioche or half fisherman's rib, nor do I even understand what those terms mean. I really haven't figured out or fallen in love with lace knitting, and I'm sure that some of those things are just, you know, they won't feel so monumental when they do happen, but it's fascinating to have a hobby that still is like learning something new all the time. I feel like that's something that if you are a fellow knitter, you could probably relate to, and it just feels like there's endless possibilities. I don't know how it could ever really get boring. And then on top of that, there is the accessibility factor of knitting. As much as I love woodworking and other hobbies, I can't exactly pick up a, circular saw at 9 p.m. and start hacking away. And I also can't really store a ton of lumber somewhere in a dry and regulated space that I could just collect it and have it at my fingertips at all time. It has to be a very calculated move to pick a project and start working on it. And I have to get off my couch, and those are all things that are, you don't have to do that in knitting. Naturally, I just dropped all my stitches, so hang on. I guess that is something nice about the Wonder Fluff, huh? As much as it was a pain to rip out, if you drop a stitch, it's really not the end of the world. It's kind of not going anywhere. Hang on. You're on. This is also, yeah, so that tangent, I just think that that's fascinating. I don't know, is anyone else like that? Let me know if you're also someone who kind of tries to embrace a theme or something in the new year, and does that stick? I don't know. I just always find that really fascinating. Oh gosh, I just did it again. It's also very slippery yarn. That alpaca is real soft. So I have been using my light bulb stitch markers to mark out all of the different cable sections in this, all those, little repeats across the body of the sweater. And it's a great way to just make sure that you're always on track. It also makes the project a little bit more mindless because you don't have to really pay attention or think about where those cables begin and end. But the light bulb stitch markers are particularly tricky, that only the one side of them, the actual round light bulby part, is what fits over the needle. So you're constantly fussing with them, trying to make sure that they're in the right orientation to actually fit your needle through. So that is one thing, even as I'm moving these stitches over, I'm like constantly flipping those things around the needles. I think perhaps in 2025, I should invest in some just round stitch markers. Do they have just round ones though that are still put on and put offable and not just a fixed stitch marker? If that makes sense, maybe you could let me know what your favorites are, because that's one thing that is just a little bit fussy. So anyway, we're on the needles, not on the needles, we're off the needles. So you're on to the try it on tubing. Let us go ahead and get this thing tried on, and we can end our try it on tubing and chat. I'm going to just throw it on over the sweater because that would be a hassle to take off. All right, we're on. I can say I actually feel the difference already, but let me stand up and we'll take a peek. Yay! This is perfect. I can already tell that just removing those few inches from the circumference, it does not seem as crazy big. And because I use a lot of math to figure this out, I feel very confident in the fact that I should be getting the fit that I am hoping for, and just trying it on really supports it. So I think I really like the little pinstripe on the side. I think it keeps it looking a little more fresh. Like I said, it's a little sporty looking. It reminds you of like a tracksuit or something, which I do really like. I think it's so funny that you could really see the difference between the cables that have been blocked up top versus the ones that haven't. So I think that even just having half of it blocked will help keep me motivated to see what it's going to look like when it's done. And now that I'm feeling good about this, I've actually been able to knit on this pretty mindlessly. And that's really how I've gotten the progress that I've done over the past week. So I'm curious to see how far we can get over the next one. And especially because I'll have the progress keeper in there, we'll be able to tell exactly what got done. So I think that's all I have to say. Sorry for the quick change. The battery died, had to fix that. All is good now. But anyway, I was saying that is the Grayling Sweater by Magdalena Parker. And it's been on my needles for 66 days today, right? Unless I was talking about the difference between the cables. Then yeah, like the cables that have been blocked look better. Moving on. So I do have a new cast on, and then I actually have a swatch whip this week, which I feel like might be a first. But the new cast on that I have is my Granada sweater by Claudia Quintanilla. It is from her book, Memory Lane, and the book as well as the yarn were both gifted by Unit Toronto for this garment. Now, I do just have the very humble beginnings because I only cast this project on 2 days ago now. So here we have it. This is the current state. Obviously, not very much to see, but this sweater is so beautiful. It has this very simple kind of stockinette body, and then the sleeves are actually done with a crochet lace and bobble, and then there's supposed to be a little collar on it. I already know that I'm not planning to have the little collar on mine, so mine will just have it looks like a set-in sleeve to me, right? Just kind of a simple sleeve shaping, and then the crochet sleeves are the star of the show here. So my version is being knit out of the recommended yarns, which are Ito Kinu, which is 100% silk. And I'm like hiding this. This is the 100% silk held together with Ito Sensai, and that is their silk mohair. And both of these are the same color. The color's called cinnamon. No, it's cinnamon and peach. They're not the same color. They just match. Now, this is actually my first time following a pattern in a book. So that's a little bit of a learning curve. I feel like if you have any tips for actually following a knitting pattern out of a book, I'd love to know. I do also have a digital file that they had sent me, but I wanted to see what the experience was like knitting from a book. And I feel like already off the bat, the number one thing I need is to invest in some Post-it notes because I don't want to mark up the book. I want to keep it in really great condition so I could always pass it off to someone else in the future. But I am already struggling. I'm like, what size am I knitting? What needle? What am I doing here? But I'm knitting mine in the size 4. I had done a gauge swatch, which matched pretty perfectly to the gauge. I think it was off by like half a stitch, but enough that I felt blocking would save the day. And so I am using the recommended needle size, which is a 3.5 millimeter or a US 4. Now you do start with the back panel and you dive in straight away with some short row shaping, and I was able to get that out of the way, and now I'm just knitting to the designated length that she says to in the pattern. And I will say that that's one thing. I've knit a couple of Claudia Quintanilla patterns now, and I really appreciate her writing style and the way that she says, you know, oh, you're going to knit now X amount of inches and you're going to measure that on this edge, because we did some short row shaping already. So you might have, or I would have at least measured from just the center point down to the length, but she says specifically on the edge. And so I just really like the way that she makes sure to have those little additional details that make the knitting experience that much more simple. I also love that we literally started out with the short rows. Now they were done with wrap and turns. That was new for me. No, actually not new. I had done that in the second garment I had ever knit. And I know that in that garment I wound up with holes. And in this one, doesn't look like I have. So I must have, I know there's a couple little sloppy guys there, but I must have figured that out a little better with these instructions. But yeah, obviously this is like nothing right now. And my number one goal for this is to get it to the point where it is under the arm, where it is just some stockinette in the round, so that this can accompany some of the next design I'm going to be telling you about. So yeah, so far, so good. Literally just now knitting back and forth until she tells me to stop, and we'll get there when we get there. So that is the Granada sweater by Claudia Quintanilla on the needles for 2 days today. Oh, and quick side note, I most definitely have each of these balls of yarn in little socks to keep them contained, because if you've worked with mohair, then you know it tends to get a little chaotic. So I just throw those in some socks. Okay, now I have an acquisition and a new cast on, aka a whip gauge swatch in progress that I'm very excited about. But this is the point where I have to say goodbye to you, Dad. Thanks for watching. I'll call you later or something. But Dad, you gotta go now. Thanks for being here. If you saw my winter knitting plans, you've probably seen me make that announcement again. And yes, my dad does support the channel. He is by no means a knitter, and nor would he ever even consider it, but he likes his daughter and I like him. So he watches the channel and it keeps him company on a Saturday afternoon. What can I say? So I'm so excited because I picked up some yarn this week at Webb's, America's Yarn Store. I feel like I talk about Webb's all the time. It's in Massachusetts. It's basically, if you ever go to yarn.com, that is Webb's. So they have their own line of yarn. It's their Valley Yarns yarn. That was actually the yarn that I have in this sweater that I was talking about, that alpaca silk. That's Valley Yarns. And Webb's is just like the biggest yarn store that you've ever been to. They carry everything from Rowan to, they have Malabrigo, they have hedgehog fibers, they have Barocco, they have Cascade 220. I mean, they just have everything there, and everything that you see on yarn.com, you can pretty much find at this store, which is like half store, half warehouse. So for me, when I have a project, when I really need to lay eyes on colors and feel things and all that good stuff, which is often what I feel like I have to do when I'm gifting something, I do really enjoy just making the trip and going and squishing and seeing everything in person. So if you saw the winter knitting plans, I talked about knitting my dad his birthday sweater, which he totally knows he's getting a sweater, but he doesn't know what it's going to look like. And I'm going to try to keep that secret. So this is always, I think, going to be at this last slot, even when it's like the high priority knit. But I am knitting my dad the Saven sweater. This is by Megan Babine of Hudson and West Co. Now, I think that this is part of a book of hers or a collection. Whatever it is, the girl's got some incredible cable knit patterns, especially for men. So if you are looking for a men's knitwear cable knit pattern, then I definitely implore you to go check this designer out because the designs are next level. That being said, it's a little intimidating to me. Sorry, I thought I heard something. Oh. Is it time for a holiday giveaway yet?
It's a holiday giveaway.
It's a holiday giveaway. Okay, so this is a really ambitious knit and one that I even stopped and said, like, can I handle this? And you know what? I think I can. And I think that you can too. So I want to know, what is the pattern that you've been looking at and wondering, can I knit that? And that is the pattern that I'd love to give you an opportunity this week to win for our holiday giveaway. Yay! Make sure to comment down below this video using hashtag #YesICan, all one word, because yes, you can knit that. And let us know that project that you've been eyeing and has maybe been intimidating you and you're feeling like, oh, I'm not really sure if I can. I'd love to just empower you to get through that knit. Leave your comment by the next podcast episode and you'll be considered for the giveaway. And of course, just make sure that you are subscribed. This is my way of saying thank you so much for being with me all year. And you'll be seeing this pop up in all of the videos this December. So thank you again for being here. Make sure that you read the instructions, comment down below, and I will be announcing the winner in the next podcast episode. So yes, I'm knitting my dad this Saven sweater by Megan Babine. Now, something I didn't realize at first is the fact that this is actually a bottom-up pieced construction, and it feels like that's a theme this year, so it's on brand, and that's honestly so okay with me. If you've never knit a pieced sweater, people make it sound like it's some horrible thing. I really find it to be, it has its ups and downs, it has its benefits, and it has its things that, are obviously not ideal. But for me, the number one thing with this is the way that you can assess, especially an intimidating knit like this one, that it is all over cable and not repeating cables. This is a lot going on. When it is done in pieces, you literally are able to break down the project and have these bite-sized quantities that is just game-changing in tackling something like this. So while part of me was like, oh, great, we're going to have to be doing a lot of back and forth knitting, it's already texture, it's already moving parts, it's already knitting and purling with cables, so who the heck cares? And I was a little relieved to know that, right now, all I have to do is get through one part of it. So that's exciting. Let me show you the yarn that I purchased. I said that I wanted to go for a denim-y blue, and I didn't even read the colorway name for this one. I truly walked around webs and I just plucked every yarn that looked and felt like the right choice and then assessed at the end, like what was in stock in a sweater's quantity, which everything was. So that's the cool thing about webs too. But this was the one that I was feeling the most drawn to, and it worked out as the best price. So this is Northampton Valley Yarns by Webb's America's Yarn Store, 100% wool in their worsted weight, and the colorway is denim heather. So each ball is 100 grams. I'm getting that denim-y look. It's a borderline. It's somewhere between a navy blue and a light blue, which is exactly what I wanted. I wanted to make sure that I was using a light enough color on this one that we could see all of the cables. But I also know my dad, and I know what he's going to wear and what he's not going to wear. So this felt like a really kind of fun choice for something that would go with a lot and be a fun color, but without being so bold and in your face. I absolutely love this choice. At first impression, I feel like this is a classic wool. It's not superwash treated at all. And you can feel that there is that little bit of stickiness, toothiness to it. But it's not scratchy by any means. I think it's still really soft. I asked my boyfriend to give it a squish for me, and he tends to find things a little bit more, he tends to be a little bit more sensitive to the different fibers, and he wasn't bothered by this at all. Not that he'd want to wear it next to skin, but he said with a t-shirt, I'm sure it'll be fine, which is exactly how I'd expect my dad to wear this. Now, there's a cable hook in here because I've been working on this swatch, and it's, the swatch you could choose to do in stockinette, but I wanted to try out the cable chart, and she has the gauge information for that in there too, which was such a nice touch for this cable knit pattern. I wanted to just sit down with the cable pattern and test it out. So I tried that last night, and I had to take a break. It was a lot. Not because the cabling was a lot. It was actually looking at my iPad screen. I was lazy. My blue light glasses were upstairs and I was downstairs, and staring at the cable chart was a lot. Anyway, I am knitting this gauge swatch up on the recommended needles for the pattern, which is a 4.5 millimeter, a US 7 needle. I have just over a quarter of this cable work chart worked, and I am definitely going to get this done in the next couple days to get this thing cast on because I have a good deadline on this one. Now, I will say, if you've never knit a cable knit sweater, I can't imagine starting with this one. When you see this cable chart, it literally looks like, it should be printed into wallpaper. It's so beautiful, the chart itself, but it's a lot of information all at once. So the thing that's tricky is, like I was saying with the Grayling sweater, I'm able to put those stitch markers between every cable repeat, and it helps you to just kind of work on it mindlessly. This is all traveling cables, so nothing is just being repeated. It's different every row for the whole thing. And so what I wound up doing was I actually drew a line down the center of the chart, and I put a stitch marker right in the center of my knitting. And that way I know that as long as those two things are lining up, we're on track. That way, if I've skipped a stitch or something weird happens, I should be able to catch it before I hit the halfway point. And then that should mean that I'll only have to kind of rip out a row or a half of a row at a time. At least that's the theory. I'm also thinking that when I get to actually casting this on and knitting it, I'm probably going to wind up utilizing lifelines more than I ever have before. And I'm thinking right now it would be wise to insert a lifeline at every sort of quarter point, because imagine I had knit all of this up across the entire width of a sweater, and then I found out I messed something up, back in one of these, if I had to undo the whole thing at some point, this is a quarter of it. I think that's a good point to pop in a lifeline and then keep knitting. And I think that'll just be fun to explore on the channel anyway. So yes, I'm so excited about this. Sorry, I just dropped it. I'm so excited about this. I'm so excited to cast this on. I already know that my dad said to my mom, he's like, I'm getting a sweater for my birthday. So he's very excited about it. He just doesn't know what it looks like, and I'm going to try to keep it a secret, but let good old dad watch the videos. So yes, this was an acquisition. This was and my whip gauge swatch. I hope to not make a habit of that. I will say too, I really do need to get more of the mindful knitting cords that have this swivel on them that work with my Nova Platina needles, because they're on different projects at the moment and this standard cord is just not doing it for me anymore. I definitely need to replace all of these with the swivel cords. It's a game changer and I need to just take these out of my needle binder anyway. So yeah, this is what we have to look forward to kick off 2025. I am so excited. It's also a really fun opportunity to play around with a color that I wouldn't typically wear. So it's just, I don't know, all around really fun. Dad's the most knit worthy. So excited to get this to him. I better finish the swatch. And with that, I think that is everything that I have today. So finished the My Jose hood, ripped out the Grayling and got back to a good place with it, cast on the Granada, swatching for Saven, and just really assessing and evaluating what this year of knitting has looked like. Definitely be on the lookout for my Everything I Knit in 2024 video. I cannot believe we're already here, but that is by far the video that I look forward to the most throughout the year. So make sure that you are subscribed and ring the bell so that you're notified when that one goes up. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, I would very much appreciate it if you would go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I want to wish everyone a Merry, Merry Christmas. I hope that you get a lot of cozy knitting time and spend lots of time with family over the next week. And with that, a big ol' thanks for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. All right, you guys, bye.